Here is your latest African news. Ethiopia. AU urges de-escalation after Ethiopia fighting resumes. The head of the African Union Commission has voiced deep concern at renewed fighting in northern Ethiopia and has called for a de-escalation. The Horn of Africa envoy Olusegun Obasanjo has been leading the international push to end the 21-month conflict in northern Ethiopia between Tigrayan rebels and government forces. Faki reiterates the African Union's continued commitment to work with the parties in support of a consensual political process in the interest of the country, the AU said, calling for both sides to engage with Obasanjo. The fighting erupted on August 24th around the southern edge of Tigray, with both the government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF) accusing the other of resuming hostilities and torpedoing a 5-month-old ceasefire. The government wants the AU envoy to lead any peace talks, but the TPLF has rejected Obasanjo's mediation. South Africa. Travel firms unite to urge an end to SA trophy hunting. Some of the world's largest travel companies have signed a statement urging the South African government to end trophy hunting. The firms, which include Booking.com, Expedia, and TripAdvisor, say they want the SA tourism industry to be more wildlife-friendly. 2 weeks ago, a survey by the charity World Animal Protection revealed that more than 80% of international tourists and more than 70% of South Africans would like to see an end to trophy hunting there. The government has been consulting the public about proposed new laws on conservation, which it says will end inhumane and harmful practices. As the consultation on the draft conservation and sustainable use of South Africa's biodiversity white papers concludes in September, the joint statement from some of the leading global tourist companies is sending out a clear message that trophy hunting must now be relegated to the past. Madagascar. Coup d'etat in Madagascar, conviction confirmed for 2 Frenchmen. The 2 Frenchmen who were convicted of trying to assassinate Madagascar's president Andry Rajoelina have had their request rejected to have their sentence of 10 and 20 years of hard labor overturned by Madagascar's Court of Cassation. Paul Rafano-Harana, a Franco-Malagasy former advisor to the head of state, and Philippe Francois, an ex-colonel of the French army converted to business, were arrested in July 2021. They were found guilty after an 8-day trial in December of having set up an operation codenamed Apollo 21 targeting Andry Rajoelina. Paul Rafano-Harana is considered the mastermind of the plot. He admitted during the trial to the existence of a letter in which he demanded a large sum of money to guarantee the overthrow of the regime in place. Philippe Francois is accused of having acted as an accomplice by concealing the illegal activities of the Apollo 21 project through a front company. They were respectively sentenced to 20 years and 10 years in prison with hard labor for attempted coup d'etat and attempted assassination of the head of state. In total, 20 people have been implicated in this case. Niger. Niger makes artificial rain to curb droughts. The Nigerian government has decided to use chemicals to induce rain in response to the drought that has caused a severe food crisis in the country this year, according to the country's meteorological department. The technology of induced rain involves using an aircraft to introduce chemicals into the clouds, including a mixture of silver, sodium, and acetone. The west of the country, including the Niamey region, benefited from the first interventions at the beginning of August, after several weeks without rain. The operation will continue until the end of September, the usual end of the rainy season in Niger. The climate in the country is Sahelian, characterized by a long dry season lasting 8 to 10 months and a short rainy season lasting 3 to 4 months. From June to September, the number of rainy days varies from north to south, with annual rainfall ranging from less than 100 millimeters, mainly in the north, to 700 and 800 millimeters. However, floods have recently affected the desert north due to climate change, according to the Nigerian authorities. In addition to the drought in several regions, other regions are affected by severe floods that have killed 53 people, affected 87,942 and injured 74 according to the latest official figures. Due to the drought and jihadist violence that has prevented farmers from cultivating their fields, Niger is facing a serious food crisis this year. Nigeria. Nigeria bans use of foreign models and voiceovers for local adverts. Nigeria has banned the use of foreign models and voiceover artists in local advertisements. The move is motivated by the federal government's interest in developing local talent, inclusive economic growth, and growing the West African country's advertising industry. The order takes effect from October 1st, and the Nigerian government has given a leeway for all ongoing campaigns to keep running until the end of their terms. According to local media reports, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari recently signed into law a bill giving ARCON the mandate of ensuring the preservation of local Nigerian content and the use of indigenous skills as an important element in local advertising, marketing, communication services. Under ARCON's regulations, organizations giving awards to corporates or individuals are mandated to write to the authority to establish the basis and process of arriving at the awards. Zimbabwe. Zimbabwean hospital offers to pay medical bill of migrant woman berated by Limpopo MEC. A private hospital in Zimbabwe has offered to pay the medical bill of a woman at the center of Limpopo Health MEC Pompey Ramathuba's rant about migrants from Zimbabwe being a huge strain on the provincial healthcare system. Arundel Hospital in Harare called on anyone with information on the woman to contact them after a video emerged of Ramathuba berating her for getting treatment in South Africa. The woman is thought to be from Zimbabwe. Ramathuba's statement that undocumented migrants are placing a strain on service delivery in the health sector has divided opinion. Zimbabwean political commentator Kudzai Mutisi said the move by Arundel Hospital was commendable, while the South African Health Department said health workers should have a high moral obligation towards their patient. It added that the health sector was under strain. Nigeria. Berlin transfers ownership of looted Benin bronze to Nigeria. The German Arts and History Foundation has signed an agreement to transfer ownership of the Benin bronzes from the Ethnological Museum in Berlin back to Nigeria. The deal between the Foundation of Prussian Cultural Heritage (SPK) and Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments (NCMM) covers 512 objects in the museum's collections. The pieces are intricate plaques and sculptures made of bronze, an important type of artwork from the region since at least the 13th century. The works in question were stolen from the Kingdom of Benin, located in what is now southwestern Nigeria, by British soldiers in 1897 and ended up in museums all over Europe. Germany already began repatriating other artifacts to Nigeria earlier this year. Under the deal, several pieces will stay on loan to Berlin for several years. After decades of formerly colonized countries demanding the return of looted artifacts, European countries have only recently begun to return some of the items. Earlier this month, London's Honeyman Museum said it would return 72 artifacts, including 12 brass plaques, to the Nigerian government, following a similar move by the Cambridge University College and a Paris museum last year. There have also been complaints that bureaucratic hurdles are slowing down the process considerably. Diaspora. Black man wrongfully convicted of New Orleans rape as a teen gets exonerated decades later. A black man wrongfully convicted as a teenager for a New Orleans rape more than 36 years ago has been freed after a judge threw out his conviction. Sullivan Walter, now 53, was convicted of a home invasion rape. Judge Darley Dubigny expressed anger that blood and semen evidence that could have cleared him never made it to the jury. After appearing in court in New Orleans, Walter was given to Elaine Hunt Correctional Center in St. Gabriel, where he was officially released. District Attorney Jason Williams' office joined the defense attorneys, working with Innocence Project New Orleans, a criminal justice advocacy group, to have the conviction vacated. Walter was 17 when he was arrested in connection with the New Orleans rape. The rapist had entered the home of the victim, identified in the records as LS, in May 1986, held a knife to her throat, and threatened to harm her 8-year-old son, who slept through the incident. Emily Moore, an attorney with Williams' office, outlined the problems in the case in court, noting there were reasons to believe the victim, the only witness, had mistakenly identified Walter. When he was cleared, Walter had been serving a total sentence of 39 years for the rape charge. Attorneys say the victim in the rape is now deceased. Walter's lawyer said in court that authorities had reached out to the victim's son, who was not present, and that he had expressed regret on behalf of his mother about the wrongful conviction.
Africa-wide, Japan pledges $30 billion in African aid. The summit between Japan and Africa finished with a promise of $30 billion in investment in African aid. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also promised to pressure for an African seat at the UN Security Council. The summit held in Tunis also served as a platform for business between Japan and the continent. Kishida said Japan would also pump $8.3 million into the gold-rich Liptako-Gourma tri-borders area between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso that has been affected by extremist attacks in recent years. The UN Security Council is made up of 15 members, 5 of whom are permanent and have veto-wielded power: the United States, Russia, China, France, and Britain. The other 10 positions are filled by other countries for 2-year stints, 5 of which are announced each year. South Africa. SA railway bosses arrested over corruption charges. The former top officials from South Africa's state-owned port and freight rail company Transnet have been arrested by elite police unit The Hawks for alleged corruption during former President Jacob Zuma's time in office. The high-profile arrest of Brian Molefe, who was the CEO, and Anoj Singh, who was the company's chief financial officer, were made early on August 29th. Both parties have been linked to a multi-million-dollar fraud and corruption case in which a bribe was allegedly paid to an organization to buy more than 1,000 trains. The accused, who are currently appearing in court, are facing charges of fraud, corruption, and money laundering. It is alleged the controversial Gupta brothers, who are yet to be extradited from the UAE, received kickbacks from the deal. They have previously denied allegations of corruption. The arrests come after the Judicial Commission of Inquiry led by Chief Justice Raymond Zondo had incriminating evidence about how executives from various government-owned entities were involved in corruption. Ghana. Lion kills a man who entered its enclosure in Ghana Zoo. A man has been killed by a lion in a zoo in Ghana's capital, Accra, after he broke into the feline enclosure, the government agency in charge of wild protection said. A statement issued by the Chief Executive of the Forestry Commission, John Alotti, under whose jurisdiction the Accra Zoo falls, said around 12 p.m. on August 28, 2022, officials of the Accra Zoo on a routine patrol noticed a middle-aged man, an intruder, had jumped the security fences and entered the lion's enclosure of the zoo. According to the commissioner, the intruder was attacked and injured by one of the lions. He was confirmed dead from his injuries and his body was taken to the morgue. The lion, the lioness, and their 2 cubs were temporarily placed in a cage while the body was retrieved from their enclosure. The motive of the intruder is yet to be determined. The zoo has called the police to open up an investigation. Kenya. Raila Odinga confident about vote-challenged court ruling. Former Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Odinga says he is confident that the Supreme Court will grant his request to overturn the result of the August 9th election, which saw his rival William Ruto announced president-elect, citing solid evidence in the case. Mr. Odinga took 48.8% of the vote compared to Mr. Ruto's 50.5%, but Mr. Odinga does not accept these results. He added that the future of democracy in Africa was at stake, citing retrogression in some African countries. Odinga and his running mate Martha Karua on August 22nd filed a petition to the country's top court challenging the outcome of the August 9th election. In a recent press conference, Odinga reaffirmed his confidence in the Supreme Court ruling. Odinga said that he had proof that he had won the elections, which requires a candidate to receive 50% of the vote plus 1 and wants a recount. The 77-year-old politician lost his 5th bid for the presidency by a narrow margin of around 230,000 votes, less than 2 percentage points. Since 2002, no presidential election in Kenya has gone uncontested, with this year's outcome also causing a rift within the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, which oversaw the poll. According to a copy of the 72-page petition, Odinga's team alleges that IEBC chairman Wafula Chebukati failed to tally around 140,000 votes. As a result, Ruto did not meet the constitutional threshold of 50% plus one of the valid votes cast, a requirement for him to be declared the winner. Judges now have less than a week to issue a ruling. If they order an annulment, a new vote must be held within 60 days. Nigeria. A Nigerian court has rejected a request to extradite a suspended police officer to the United States after he was implicated by a social media celebrity in a fraud case. Deputy Police Commissioner Abba Kyari was suspended after he was implicated in the case of Nigerian social media influencer Raymond Abbas, known as Hush Puppy, who pleaded guilty to money laundering and many other crimes in the United States. On August 30th, a federal court sitting in Abuja dismissed an extradition request filed by Nigeria's Attorney General Abubakar Malami after Kyari's indictment in the U.S. Judge Inyang Ekwo dismissed the application, calling it strange, incompetent, and bereft of merit. Ekwo said that as the country's chief law officer, Malami ought to be aware that the Extradition Act forbids the surrendering of a defendant that is already facing trial before a competent court in the country. Kyari has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, but in February, the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency (NDLEA) arrested him for cocaine smuggling and belonging to an international drug syndicate. So, he is standing trial in Nigeria for an alleged link with drug barons. The FBI said last year that Hush Puppy's crimes cost his victims almost $24 million in total. According to the FBI, citing court documents, Hush Puppy confessed to paying Kyari a bribe for the arrest of a former associate. Kyari has denied the charges. Chad. Chad's National Dialogue election of Presidium members stormy. The election in Chad of the members of the Presidium, the body in charge of leading the work of the Inclusive and Sovereign National Dialogue (DNIS) between the civilian and armed opposition and the military government, took place in a stormy atmosphere on August 28th. The head of the military government, Mahamat Idris Deby Itno, had kicked off this dialogue on August 20th in N'Djamena, boycotted by some armed groups and members of civil society. It is expected to lead to free and democratic elections and the transfer of power to civilians. More than 500 of the 1,400 dialogue delegates applied to join the 21-member Presidium. They were nominated by members of the Organizing Committee for the Inclusive National Dialogue, CODNI. Gali Ngothe Gata, a presidential candidate in 2016 against the former head of state Idris Deby Itno, who ruled the country for 30 years, was elected to head the Presidium. But when the composition of his body was announced, many delegates stood up and shouted in protest after some members accused the panel of not including enough Arabic speakers in the list. In a statement, several small political parties had threatened on August 27th to withdraw from the dialogue, denouncing maneuvers aimed at undermining the success of his dialogue so long awaited by the Chadian people. The work of the commissions, whose themes include social issues, peace, national reconciliation, and fundamental freedoms, is due to begin on August 30th. The initial schedule calls for a closing ceremony on September 20th. Diaspora. Black August uplifted as Alternative Black History Month. To many, February is the month dedicated to celebrating Black Americans' contributions to a country where they were once enslaved. But Black History Month has an alternative. It's called Black August. First celebrated in 1979, Black August was created to commemorate the famed Panther George Jackson's fight for Black liberation. 51 years since his death, Black August is now a month-long awareness campaign and celebration dedicated to Black freedom fighters, revolutionaries, radicals, and political prisoners, both living and deceased. The annual commemorations have been embraced by activists in the global Black Lives Matter movement, many of whom draw inspiration from freedom fighters like Jackson and his contemporaries. George Jackson was 18 when he was arrested for robbing a gas station in Los Angeles in 1960. He was convicted and given an intermediate sentence of 1 year to life and spent the next decade at California's Soledad and San Quentin prisons, much of it in solitary confinement. While incarcerated, Jackson began studying the words of revolutionary theoreticians such as Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, who advocated class awareness, challenging institutions and overturning capitalism through revolution. Founding leaders of the Panthers, including Huey P. Newt and Bobby Seale, were also inspired by Marx, Lenin, and Chinese leader Mao Zedong. Jackson became a leader in the prisoner rights movement. His letters from prison to loved ones and supporters were compiled in the best-selling books Soledad Brother and Blood in My Eye. Inspired by his words and frustrated with his situation, George's younger brother Jonathan initiated a takeover at the Marin County Superior Court in California in 1970. He freed 3 inmates and held several courthouse staff hostage in an attempt to demand the release of his brother and 2 other inmates known as the Soledad Brothers, who were accused of killing a correctional officer. Jonathan was killed as he tried to escape, although it's disputed whether he was killed in a courtroom shootout or fatally shot while driving away with hostages. George was killed on August 21, 1971, during a prison uprising. Inmates in San Quentin prison began formally commemorating his death in 1979, and from there, Black August was born. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like our video. It's the best way of supporting us. And remember, Africa is watching. Africa-wide. African nations call out climate injustice ahead of COP27. African countries have called for an end to climate injustice, saying the continent causes less than 4% of global CO2 emissions but pays one of the highest prices for global warming. Government officials, international organizations, NGOs, and the private sector from more than 60 African nations attended the August 29th opening of Africa Climate Week in Gabon's capital to prepare for the COP27 UN Climate Conference in Egypt this November. Host President Ali Bongo Ondimba told the gathering the continent has to speak with one voice and offer concrete proposals for COP27. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, head of COP27, which will be held in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, said despite contributing less than 4% of global emissions, Africa was one of the most devastated by the impact of climate change. Denouncing the failure of developed countries to deliver on their climate commitments, the foreign minister warned that there is no extra time, no plan B, and there should also be no backsliding or backtracking on commitments and pledges. CAR top court blocks crypto for citizenship plan. A plan by the government of the Central African Republic to allow foreigners to acquire citizenship and land using a new cryptocurrency has been ruled as unconstitutional by the country's top court. Last month, the government launched Sango Coin amid a sharp fall in Bitcoin prices and doubts over the project's viability in a country struggling with conflict. Sales of the initial $21 million on offer have been slow, with just over 5% of the target bought in the hours after its launch on the 21st of July. According to the Sango website, foreign investors could obtain citizenship for $60,000 worth of crypto, with the equivalent Sango coins held as collateral for 5 years, and e-residency for $6,000 held for 3 years. Investors would also be able to buy a 250 square kilometer plot of land for $10,000, with the Sango coins locked away for a decade. The Constitutional Court ruled that nationality did not have a market value and that residency required a physical stay in the country. Angola. Angolan opposition to contest election results. Angola's largest opposition party, UNITA, says it will contest last week's election results that saw the long-ruling MPLA win a majority. Elections held on August 24th were the most hotly contested the oil-rich country has seen since the first multi-party vote in 1992. Results declared on the 29th of August placed the Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, as the winner with 51.17% of the vote, securing President João Lourenço a second term. But the opposition National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, has said it does not recognize the results from the National Election Commission and will file a legal claim which will have the effect of suspending the declaration of the final results. During the final phase of counting, the party claims not to have been informed of the decision by the Electoral Commission to ratify the results and to not have received a copy of the tables of the final results. Candidates have 72 hours after the announcement of results to file a claim to the Constitutional Court contesting the ballot. Africa-wide. Ship with Ukraine wheat for drought-hit Horn of Africa docks in Djibouti. A UN-chartered ship loaded with Ukrainian wheat destined for millions at risk of starvation in Ethiopia arrived in Djibouti on August 30th. The bulk carrier MV Brave Commander, which is carrying 23,000 tons of grain, docked in the Horn of Africa port city, the UN's World Food Programme said 2 weeks after leaving a Black Sea port in Ukraine. Ukraine, one of the world's largest grain exporters, was forced to halt almost all deliveries after their conflict with Russia in February, raising fears of a global food crisis. Exports of grains and other foodstuffs and fertilizers from 3 Black Sea ports resumed at the start of this month under a deal between Kyiv and Moscow that was brokered by the UN and Turkey in July. The agreement lifted a Russian blockade of Ukraine's ports and set terms for millions of tons of wheat and other grain to start flowing from silos and ports. Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia are experiencing their worst drought in 40 years, and the UN's World Meteorological Organization warned last week that the situation is set to get even worse with a 5th consecutive failed rainy season. Ethiopia. UN says aid delivery to Tigray is suspended. The UN has said efforts to deliver humanitarian aid in the embattled northern Ethiopian region of Tigray have been suspended after fresh fighting broke out last week. The renewed violence, currently concentrated in the neighboring Amhara region, is worsening the crisis amid calls for de-escalation. The UN says that aid delivery by road transport into Tigray has not been done since mid-last week. Flights transporting aid workers have also been suspended and operational cash is not being delivered. Nigeria. Nigeria enrolls Boko Haram child victims to school. Nigeria's northeastern Borno state government has launched an ambitious school enrollment program for thousands of children displaced by the Boko Haram jihadist insurgency. The state governor, Babagana Zulum, launched the initiative in Monguno town, where victims of the conflict have been staying in camps after being displaced from their communities. Some 7,000 children were registered to primary and junior secondary school in the first phase of the program. The authorities say many of the beneficiaries are children orphaned by the violence and that the project is targeting more than 20,000 children across the state. The insurgency, which began in 2009, has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced millions of others in northeastern Nigeria and several neighboring countries. It forced many children to abandon schools and others could not be enrolled at all. Learning institutions have also been destroyed. The authorities, however, say they are making efforts to ensure children are back to school by building new schools and sponsoring their education. Jamaica. Jamaican minister rejects workers' abuse claims on Canadian firms. Jamaica's Labour Minister has rejected complaints from Jamaican farm workers who say they face conditions akin to systematic slavery in Canada, saying he observed no evidence of mistreatment during a recent visit to farms in the province of Ontario. In a statement, Carl Samuda said he toured 9 farms between August 14th and 16th, including the 2 farms employing the temporary migrant workers from Jamaica who raised the alarm over their work conditions. In another statement, the Jamaican farm workers slammed Samuda's comments as a slap in the face of every farm worker and their families. The workers are in Canada under a temporary migrant labor program that began in 1966 as an agreement between Canada and Jamaica, which has since expanded to include 10 other Caribbean countries, which allows Canadian employees to hire temporary migrant workers to fill gaps in the agricultural labor market. Temporary foreign workers and their supporters have been calling on Canada to grant them permanent residency as a way to defend their rights. A National Day of Action is planned for September 18th, one day before Canada's Parliament resumes, to demand the government grant legal status to all foreign workers, refugees, students, and undocumented people in the country. USA. Barbie honors the first female self-made millionaire, Madam C.J. Walker, with a new doll. Mattel is honoring Madam C.J. Walker, the first female self-made millionaire, with her own Barbie doll. Walker, a hair care magnate from the early 1900s, is the latest influential figure to join Mattel's Inspiring Women series, which celebrates courageous and innovative women. She joins other prominent women like Maya Angelou, Ida B. Wells, and Ella Fitzgerald, who have also had their Barbies made in their likenesses. Walker was born Sarah Breedlove in 1867 to former enslaved sharecroppers on a cotton plantation in Delta, Louisiana. She was one of 5 children and the first to be born free. By the age of 18, Walker had her first and only child, also named Alelia, and would lose her husband 2 years later. She then moved to St. Louis and married Charles J. Walker, who helped promote her business. After experiencing hair loss from a scalp condition in the 1890s, Walker experimented with at-home treatment remedies and developed her first hair product in 1906. By 1908, Walker successfully established herself as an entrepreneur when she opened the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company in Pittsburgh, where she trained future beauticians and created beauty products. When she transferred the company to Indianapolis in 1910, her business had already generated millions of dollars in profits, making her the first black woman to become a self-made millionaire. Walker also donated money to philanthropic organizations, including the St. Louis Colored Orphans Home and the Flanner Settlement House in Indianapolis, which became the first settlement house for black people in the city. Walker died in 1919 at the age of 51 from hypertension and kidney failure. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like our video. It's the best way of supporting us. And remember, Africa is watching. Ethiopia. Tigray rebels ready to continue advancing in northern Ethiopia. The rebels in Ethiopia's Tigray region say they are open to negotiations with the federal government but determined to continue advancing into northern Ethiopia as long as its military reinforcements continue to threaten their region. After a 5-month truce, fighting resumed on 24th August between the Federal Army and Tigrayan rebel troops who accuse each other of having triggered the hostilities. Journalists have no access to northern Ethiopia, making independent verification impossible. The mobile and internet networks are also unreliable and the situation on the ground is difficult to assess. In recent days, according to sources, the rebels have advanced about 50 kilometers south of the Tigray border into the neighboring Amhara region and southeast into the Afar region. Abiy's government has announced that federal forces had pulled back from the town of Kobo, while Getachew said a significant part of the North Wollo zone in Amhara was in rebel hands. In response to Getachew's comments, the government communication service said that the federal government is still committed to the peaceful resolution to the conflict that was once again initiated by the TPLF terrorist group. The renewed fighting shattered a truce announced in late March and has cast a shadow over efforts to try end the near 22-month conflict. The war has killed untold number of civilians and left millions in need of humanitarian aid, with Tigray itself without access to basic services and struggling with food and fuel shortages. Liberia asks Oman to halt visas for domestic jobs. The Liberian government has requested authorities in the Arabian country of Oman to immediately halt the issuance of visas to Liberians seeking to travel to the country for domestic employment. The request comes after a group of women already in the country posted graphic images of sexual abuse and other forms of mistreatment they say they were going through in the hands of their so-called employers. In a virtual meeting, Liberia's Labour Minister Charles Gibson differed with officials of Oman's Global Affairs Department, who had described some of the reports by the Liberian as unsubstantiated media claims. An Omani government official has said the request to halt visa issuance will be considered. Kenya court begins a full hearing on poll petition. The Supreme Court of Kenya has begun hearing the presidential poll petition by Raila Odinga, who is challenging the result of the August 9th presidential election, which delivered victory to William Ruto. The 7-bench judges led by Martha Koome already have begun the pre-trials after 2 affidavits that were struck out. In the previous ruling, the judges ruled out Odinga's involvement in the chaos that happened at the National Tally Center at Bomas of Kenya when the chairperson of the Electoral Commission wanted to declare the president-elect. The 77-year-old veteran politician, who was running for the 5th time in the presidential election and was backed by incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta and his party, lost the election by some 230,000 votes, 50.49% to 48.85%. In a statement to the court, Ruto said Odinga had in the past systematically challenged the result of the presidential elections and fomented national cries after losing. He accused the former Prime Minister of trying to try his luck again by forcing a new candidacy through judicial means. According to the 72-page petition, the Odinga camp claims that 140,000 ballots were not counted and that this significantly affects the final results insofar as none of the candidates reached the constitutional threshold of 50% plus 1 vote to win the election in the first round. The judges must rule out his appeal by September 5th. If they order the cancellation of the election, a new election must be held within 60 days. Horn of Africa. Khartoum summons Ethiopian ambassador after plane crash. The Sudanese foreign minister has summoned the Ethiopian ambassador, saying Ethiopia had shot down a plane from Sudanese airspace. On August 24th, the Ethiopian army announced that it had shot down a plane loaded with weapons destined for the rebels in Tigray North, which had violated Ethiopian airspace after flying over Sudan. At a press conference in Khartoum on August 29th on the resumption of hostilities in northern Ethiopia, Ethiopian ambassador Yibeltal Amero Alemu stated that there is no doubt that the news of the plane that flew over Sudanese airspace into Ethiopian airspace and was shot down by the Ethiopian army is true, but only happened for defense purposes. In a statement, the Sudanese foreign minister said the Ethiopian ambassador had been summoned, saying its Director General for African Affairs, Fadl Abdallah Fadl, had denounced baseless allegations. Ethiopia did not specify the origin of the aircraft or when it was shot down. Fighting resumed on August 24th between Tigrayan rebels and the Ethiopian Federal Army in border areas of Tigray. South Africa. South Africa's Ramaphosa lashes xenophobic hospital protests. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has condemned anti-immigrant protests that had prevented foreigners from accessing a hospital in the capital, fueling concerns about rising xenophobia. A new anti-immigration movement dubbed Operation Dudula, meaning pushback in Zulu, has been picketing Kalafong Hospital in Atteridgeville, a township west of Pretoria. Protesters have blocked patients on the basis of skin color and language, infringing on basic rights, the government said in a separate statement. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says acts of lawlessness directed at foreign nationals should not be tolerated. Ramaphosa maintained that South Africans were not xenophobic but quite welcoming. But he added that law enforcement and security forces were carrying out operations to deal with the issue of illegal migration. The protesters blame long waits and poor service in the public health sector on strains caused by an influx of foreign migrants. Their action follows a viral video of Provincial Health Minister Dr. Porphy Ramatuba berating a Zimbabwean patient, accusing her of seeking treatment at a government hospital at the expense of South Africans. Medical care at public hospitals in South Africa is free, but the costs are borne by payroll and other taxes. Diaspora. Venezuela, Colombia take steps towards normalizing ties. The governments of Venezuela and Colombia took a step towards normalizing ties when President Nicolás Maduro hosted an event to welcome the newly appointed ambassador from the neighboring country, a post that had been empty since 2019 over a diplomatic impasse. Colombian Ambassador Armando Benedetti met with Maduro a day after arriving in Venezuela. He was designated to the post by new President Gustavo Petro, who abandoned his conservative predecessor's opposition to Maduro and vowed to re-establish relations with his government. Maduro and Benedetti met at the Miraflores Palace in the capital, Caracas. Colombia, for decades the region's strongest ally of the United States, was among dozens of countries that withdrew recognition of Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate leader after his 2018 re-election, which they argued was fraudulent. Petro, Colombia's fast leftist president, and Maduro have expressed willingness to build a new stage of cooperation, including the reopening of border-crossing bridges to commercial traffic, the renewal of military collaboration to ease tensions in areas where armed groups operate, and the resumption of Colombian consular services in Venezuela. Maduro expelled all Colombian diplomats in February 2019. He maintains that former Colombian President Ivan for years promoted plans to topple his government. The Venezuelan government has estimated that the commercial exchange within a year of a fully reopened border could exceed $4 billion.
The war in Ethiopia between the federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front has resumed at full scale. The route back to negotiation is uncertain at best. The two sides agree that first shots were fired in the early morning of 24th of August on the southern border of Tigray, where it adjoins the neighboring Amhara state, at the town of Kobo, with each side blaming the other for firing those shots. Meanwhile, forced mass conscription by the TPLF has swelled its ranks, and it has devoted much of its resources to training and rearming, although it has denied forced recruitment. It is believed the group captured a huge arsenal from the federal army in last year's fighting, and there are rumors that it has also received weapons from abroad. 2 days before it resumed the war by launching the attack on Rayakobo on August 24th, the TPLF had dismissed AU's credibility and essentially called for Western intervention in an article published in the African Report on 22nd August. In the article, the group condemned the AU for claiming that there is hope for an imminent diplomatic breakthrough with respect to peace talks. The Ethiopian government responded by saying it was dismissing non-African proposal for peace and sees any other intervention as a form of neocolonialism. It also cautioned the international community against what it deemed as Pan-African sabotage. By calling for Western intervention, it has seen that the TPLF has finally declared the truth about itself, that it's a protege of external forces, mainly the US and the EU. With backing of the US, the TPLF has ruled Ethiopia as an authoritarian state for nearly 3 decades, since 1991, when all political parties outside the ruling coalition, led by itself, were banned. There was no space for free press. Ethiopia during this period also disintegrated into a loose federation of ethnicity, organized regional states, with each having their own militia. It has recently also come to light that some international institutions like the UN, WFP, and USAID have also been a part of fueling the war and supporting the TPLF agenda, with a recent example being how the food aid given out by USAID to supposedly feed innocent and hungry people in the Tigray region is ending up in the hands of the terrorist group, with the international organizations claiming that the groups had stolen the aid, which is highly questionable as there seems to be no accountability from the aid groups. In 2018, mass pro-democracy protests forced the TPLF out of power at the center and reduced it to only a regional force in Tigray alone. Abiy Ahmed came to fore at this time as a progressive prime minister with a vision of inclusive Ethiopian nationalism that transcended ethnic divisions. Apart from opening up political space within the country and allowing free press, Ahmed reforms also extended to foreign policy. Signing a peace deal with Eritrea soon after becoming the prime minister, Abiy ended up decades-long conflict with a northern neighbor that TPLF had declared and continued to regard as an enemy. He followed it up with a tripartite agreement in which Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia declared that the conflict between the three states had been resolved and their relations had entered a new phase based on cooperation. It is believed that such a resolution of antagonism between African states and people is not appreciated by the United States or the European Union. They find this a very bad example because in the long term, it might weaken and eventually collapse the African so-called NATO, namely the US Command Africom. All diplomatic maneuvers of the Biden administration and the UN have since aimed at depicting the Ethiopian federal government, which is fighting a defensive war, as the aggressor. The US has also announced several sanctions against Ethiopia. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like our video. It's the best way of supporting us. And remember, Africa is watching.